Welcome back to the final segment of episode 31 of Geek Therapy Radio. I'm Johnny Hamburger. I need to come up with a new name. Mental Curator's cool, but maybe I can start thinking of other stuff. I already did Freak of Geek. I already did High Priest of Geek. Geeks are sexy. That's not a name for me, but that's just a fact. Geeks are sexy. Obviously, go to YouTube. Look at this sexy geek. Or freak. I'm Johnny Hamburger. Welcome back. Geek Therapy Radio. I have been nerding out with my Commodore 64 this week. There is a simple beauty to 8-bit computing. I went on eBay because I was looking for an easier way to load programs onto the Commodore 64. And if you've grown up and you're familiar with the Commodore 64 and many other 8-bit systems, 8-bit home computers, you're quite familiar with how tedious it is to load programs into the Commodore 64, into the computer. Back in the day, you could use a disk drive, use big floppy disks if you were lucky, and that still took forever to load. What took even longer to load were cassette tapes. You used to be able to buy games and software on cassette tapes, and you put the cassette player into the player, the data set or whatever, and you type, I'm blanking out. I'm brain farting. I was just doing this. Run. Anyways, and you press play on the tape player, and the Commodore 64, the computer listens to the data on the tape. It's an actual audio signal, sine waves. It's actual data that's recorded as audio onto the tape, and you play it, and the computer listens to it. And if everything goes right, you had the settings just right, you'd load the game up in like several minutes, or however long how big the program was, how long it took on the tape. 15 minutes you could go up to, around there. So to load a program, it wasn't just double click and it opens. Nope. It was set up the Commodore to listen to the tape, press play on the tape, and wait. And look at the screen, all the colors going by on the screen as it listens to the audio coming off the tape. So I was looking on eBay. There's got to be an easier way to load programs so you don't have to. I have an app on my phone which has all the audio from all those programs and games for the Commodore 64. And what I do is I plug into the headphone jack and I make the Commodore 64. I run the command to listen to the audio input. And then if I want to play Donkey Kong on Commodore 64, I press play on the Donkey Kong file and it spits out all the audio over the headphone jack, and the Commodore 64 listens for minutes and minutes and minutes. And then if I'm lucky and had everything set just right, I can play Donkey Kong on Commodore 64. I ever thought, there's got to be a better way. And there is a better way. You can basically get an SD card to SD to tape converter. It uses the data set port, and you can store all your games, and like everything for the Commodore 64 will fit on a 2 gigabyte SD card. Let's just be real. So you fit it all in an SD card, and then you can load your games and programs off the SD card in much less time. If you have a fast loader cartridge, it's just an easy way to do that. So that's what I was geeking out about this week. That's what I was looking on eBay for, was to get the most out of my Commodore 64. And they cost like $60, which is, to me, it's a good investment. I didn't buy it yet. But I will. And it's going to be super duper fun and super duper nerdy. And I'm going to sit there and I'm going to be typing on my Commodore 64 and loading these programs and playing these old games that most of them suck, but some of them don't. There's something, it's just romantic. You plug in the composite output into your CRT, not your flat screen, not your HD TV, because it'll look terrible. Because, native resolution is a thing, folks. So that's what I'm looking forward to. I have popcorn in my throat. You see me swallowing so much, there's popcorn in my throat. I've been on this popcorn binge. What do geeks snack on? Popcorn. Just don't eat popcorn over your Commodore 64 keyboard because obvious reasons. Little tale, when I bought the C64, I bought it several months ago, and I went to pick it up in the DeLorean. So you do not get much more 80s, much more geek than that by going to pick up a Commodore 64 from an electrical engineer, but going to pick up a vintage Commodore 64 in a DeLorean. I'm struggling to find what is more geek about that, because the only thing more geek about that would be going up to pick up an Atari 2600 in a TIE fighter or something. And you can't do that. Well, no, you can't do that. I was thinking, well, maybe if you got the... No, you can't. I was thinking of a giant drone, basically, with the body of a TIE fighter, and you could... my geek brain. Thank you for listening to Geek Therapy Radio this week. Talked about a lot of stuff, human head transplants and drones and Commodore 64. It was a pretty nerdy episode. So subscribe to the podcast wherever you get the podcast. I've tested on many different apps. You can get the podcast, Geek Therapy Radio podcast, on iTunes. You can get it on Spreaker. I have an app on my Android called Pocket Cast. You can get it there. You can get the podcast anywhere. The iHeartradio app is the easiest way. Download the iHeartradio app and subscribe to the podcast, and you'll get a notification every time I upload the podcast, which, by the way, is usually Friday nights or early Saturday mornings before my show actually airs at 12 a.m. Sundays right here on KPRC 950, an iHeartRadio station in Houston, Texas. So subscribe to the podcast. And if you're curious, go to the YouTube and subscribe to my channel on YouTube, where I can actually show you a lot of cool stuff. I've got my review of the DeLorean on there, as I mentioned, amongst other things, drone footage, all sorts of cool little things up there on the Geek Therapy Radio YouTube. So go sub. Be good to each other. Be good to yourself. Embrace your inner geek. If you're listening, if you just stumbled on this show and you don't think you're a geek, at least think back to your childhood. I always go back to Legos. Did you like playing with Legos as a child? Go out this week, you big, strong, grown man or big, strong, independent woman. After work, go buy a set of Legos and just spend some time playing with Legos. Spend 5 or 10 minutes on your hobby this week. Don't let the world beat that out of you. Do it for yourself. It'll make you happier. If you don't know what your hobby is, try a bunch of different things. Not drugs. Drugs are not a hobby. Shut up. They are not. They will always destroy you. That is not a hobby. But a healthy hobby, sewing, video games within moderation, because you can be addicted to that too. Just be good to yourself, be good to others, hold the door for people, say please and thank you. Just be good, smile. Be good to yourself. I love you all. Thank you very much for listening. There'll be more Geek Therapy Radio next week, and if you just stumbled on the show, there is just a smorgasbord of geeky podcasts available for you. Just look it up and subscribe. Also on YouTube and Instagram and Facebook. Geek Therapy Radio, geektherapyradio.com. Thank you for listening. More GTR next week. Peace out, my geeks.